Hi, everyone, and welcome to this artist talk. So glad to have you join us this evening. Just real quick before we start, we ask that you all keep your microphones muted for the duration of the talk, although I do encourage you to type into the chat with your comments and questions. And at the end of this talk, we'll hopefully have time to get to as many of your questions as we can. My name is Carolyn Smith. I am the Associate Director for SLATE Contemporary Gallery. We're located here in Oakland, California, and I am honored to moderate this talk today. The conversation this evening is going to focus on Holly Wong's solo exhibition titled Guardians of the Spirit. It's on view now at the Carolyn Gallery at CSU Fort Collins. Holly will be giving you an in-depth look at this body of work, kind of walk you through the gallery, through her pieces, and also through her creative process. SLATE Contemporary Gallery has been Holly Wong's West Coast, California representative since 2019. And I personally first met Holly during her first solo exhibition with SLATE in 2021. The show is titled Phoenix, which featured wonderful works on paper, including an 11-foot paper drawing installation, which was hanging right here where I'm sitting in the middle of the gallery. As you'll discover this evening, Holly Wong creates installations, assemblages, and works on paper that summon protection and celebrate the female energy. Much of Holly's work is constructed with ephemeral materials that are both strong and yet also really fragile at the same time. A through line in her work is in finding and creating beauty and brokenness as an act of resistance. Holly Wong lives and works in San Francisco. She was educated at the SF Art Institute, where she graduated with a Master's of Fine Arts with a concentration in new genres. And I'm going to let her unpack that term for you. She's been awarded visual arts grants from the Integrity Arts and Culture Association, the Barbara Deming Memorial Fund, the George Sugarman Foundation, and the Puffin Foundation, among others. She's a President Scholar in the Arts and has over 70 group exhibitions and 10 solo exhibitions. What I think is so unique about this exhibition that we'll be exploring this evening, Guardian of the Spirits, is the collaboration that occurred between Holly and between the students at CSU. The Lory Student Center has a wonderful arts program that allows the students to work closely with the artists every step of the way, from curation to installation to marketing, and now this artist talk that we're sharing with you this evening. I think this type of education and knowledge of the gallery world is so valuable for artists who are just beginning their careers. And we are very fortunate today to have two of the artists who worked with Holly here today. So I'm thrilled to introduce you to Claudia, who is the assistant manager of the Lory Student Center Arts Program and a painting grad in the MFA program. And also Miles, who is a graduating senior getting his BFA in drawing and has been with the Lory Student Center Arts Program for several years. So at this point, I'm going to turn the conversation over to Holly Wong, Claudia, and Miles.
Great. Good evening. Hi, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I'm Claudia.
And I'm Miles.
And we'd like to start off by telling you a little bit about what we do and how we fit into Colorado State University. The Lory Student Center Arts Program, or LSC Arts, is a division of campus activities seeking to bring the visual arts to all students at CSU. Therefore, we manage 3 exhibition spaces in the LSC: the Carolyn Gallery, Duhessa Gallery, and the Hollery. Through a variety of exhibition opportunities, we hope to create an environment that welcomes emerging, nationally renowned Native American and student artists. The Carolyn Gallery provides a showcase for the creations of nationally and internationally recognized artists, as well as the work of local and student artists. Every year, we receive hundreds of applications from artists around the world to exhibit in the Carolyn Gallery. The LSC crew, consisting of about 10 undergraduate and graduate students, come together each year to choose who exhibits in the gallery the following year. Holly was chosen through this process pre-pandemic, and we were finally able to exhibit her work this year. Holly's visit to CSU was a special experience for those of us who helped with the installation and for those who attended the exhibition. Holly encouraged students to assist with the careful curation of her delicate and beautiful pieces, which opened the opportunity for trust and collaboration. We were all touched by Holly's words during her artist talk at the opening reception of Guardian of the Spirits about the inspiration behind her work and her art process. It was a pleasure to have Holly visit each of our studios and provide us with feedback and words of wisdom. And as you can see in this slide, we have the crew, all of the students in LSC Arts, as well as Doug Sink, who is the manager of LSC Arts on the right there. So the questions we will ask tonight come from the LSC Arts crew. But before we get into questions, we would like to introduce Holly.
Hi there. It's such a privilege to be in community with all of you tonight and to connect with my dear friends at CSU Fort Collins. And I will start with the first slides. Miles, the floor is yours.
Absolutely. My first question for you, Holly, is being flexible with your installation part of how you construct them?
I would say that that is definitely true. When you look at these slides here, and that's you over there on the left doing some sewing on my piece, and there are students on the right there installing she. There is definitely, when I go into a space, I have to consider the light, the time of year. A lot of times, what I see on the map or the schematics is really different when I actually go into the space and feel how the work is existing in that space. So a lot of times I make different decisions, and I try to feel what the space needs and then plan out the work accordingly.
Absolutely. My second question was, what are your other methods of problem solving when assembling works?
So when I'm assembling works, a lot of times I will put work in a space and it just won't feel right to me. So I will reserve the right to sort of change my mind, as it were. Sometimes I reconfigure works. Sometimes I use some works that I wouldn't have normally considered in a space just because they felt right. Sometimes I adapt pieces. Sometimes pieces become vertical instead of horizontal. Because I work modularly, that's a great way to solve problems because it allows me to be flexible.
Is there a specific event or moment in your career that helped you relieve the need for control when it comes to installing with others?
I love that question. This is, and I can see that happening here with the students installing she on the right. I love the drafting film sort of framing his face like an arch. It's so sweet. I worked and still work a day job and work among teams, large teams of people. And I learned pretty early in my career doing office work that you're not the smartest person in the room and you don't need to be. You are actually one member of a team, and that together you need the team to make something happen. We had a limited amount of time to install a very large show together. And while I gave you guys some general parameters, you really did your own problem solving in terms of how certainly the way she went up, and then later on the Guardian of the Spirits, which was a large suspended piece, we'll also be talking about. I love to watch the dialogue between you all as you started to think about how things weighed, how color balanced, how things moved, how people moved in this space. And it is that problem solving that if I didn't back off and give you that agency, I don't think the show could have been as good as it became. I believe that the best ideas come from a team and not just I'm not a big fan of the so-called individual genius. I think it's somewhat of an illusion.
How did you come across your materials and realize their potential, such as drafting film, vinyl, and tablecloth?
So, the drafting film, and you can see a variety of materials pictured here. On the left is the fabric and LED light, and on the right is certainly vinyl tablecloth, and then more traditional paper and framed works. Like many art students, I started out using more traditional materials in school, like canvas and paper. But I also drew from a rich history of hanging out with my mom when I was growing up, and she would sew. And I loved hanging out with her as she selected fabric, selected tracing paper to build her own patterns. So I became more comfortable with things that were the so-called disregarded things. I found comfort in using those materials because there was less of a preciousness about it. So it's always been something that's been part of my journey, really, and has been just more and more a larger part of my practice.
My next question for you, Holly, is what would be the #1 tip that you would give to students who wish to develop an artistic practice and career?
So I would say that my advice is sort of twofold. The first part of it is, of course, being able to create community, and being able to continue to connect with others after you graduate from school. I think it's essential to build the backbone of an enriching life so that you can continue to work artistically, such as having a safe place to live, having enough to eat, health insurance, good mental health care, addressing the basic needs that you have as a person, and making sure that you have a way to earn an income that sustains your life, which becomes more and more important as you age. I will say that the other thing is to have a daily studio practice, because your daily conversation with your work, even if it's only for 15 or 20 minutes, is something that always enriches what you're doing. And I'm not sure there's really a replacement for that daily language, even if it's, like I said, a brief amount of time.
Absolutely.
I'll share some slides here of the overall shots of the space. This is she and the quilt suspensions 1 and 2. She is, I would say, roughly 14 or 15 feet across and maybe 11 feet deep. The piece varies in size depending on how it's installed. And then the quilt suspensions I'll be showing are about 5 feet high and maybe 4 or 5 feet wide. And they suspend from the wall maybe about 2 feet.
Are there elements of this installation that are inspired by marine life or the aquatic world?
That's a great question that a patron picked up on. And I was looking at marine life when I designed this back in 2020. I had made this piece when we were during the pandemic lockdown, and I was looking at pictures of sea coral. I did these are fairly organic and wandering type works. They're colored pencil on drafting film that has been hand cut. It's drawn on both sides, so the piece is fully 3-dimensional and you can walk around it. But yes, absolutely marine life, especially because I live so close to the beach here out in San Francisco. This is quilt suspensions 1 and 2, and these 2 pieces have quite an affinity to me in particular. And I'll move on to the next one. This is a detail. This is basically cotton and silk and organza, and they're pieced together with invisible thread. And I think we have a question here.
Yeah. What role does quilting play in your life and its connection to your artwork?
So quilting was something that I discovered later on in my adult life. My mother was not a quilter. She made clothes, and typically she made curtains and she made clothes, and usually it was the same fabric. But I eventually, as an adult, I became attracted to quilting because of the ways in which it was a metaphor for piecing together wholeness. And bringing connection, layering and connection together, mending of brokenness, which is what a lot of these works are about. As I looked at these particular pieces, the quilt suspensions, I thought of the Chinese custom of burial blankets, of layering different colored blankets upon the loved one, the deceased loved one. So quilting has a lot of significance on many levels for me. This is a detail of the quilt suspension too. And then this is quilt suspensions 3 and 4, and I really loved the alcove, which is this area here. There's a window that shows some section of the trees. And I just loved the sort of the architecture of this space and how these pieces could rest within it. These pieces are also about 5 by 5 and about 2 feet deep.
The next question is, did you decide to use lights to represent the soul before you started working on this concept?
So I love this question because I think a lot of artists kind of do something and then figure out what they did later after they did it. I will say that this whole series was stemmed by conversations with a community of artists through I belong to an organization called Network, and there was a Brooklyn-based artist who was reviewing my work named William Pauhida, and he had talked about the fact that, you know, light was really something that I should actually incorporate directly in my work. And he suggested LED, and I was a little bit stuck on Christmas lights for a while. But then when I realized that you could get LED and solid strip light just by going on Amazon, actually, I was able to find this solution. My husband, Al Wong, suggested photo diffuser film, which I then used in this work to sort of diffuse so that there were hot and direct spots. So there were different focuses of the light. And I do think that artists are often the people that are going to give you some of your best critiques sometimes.
So Holly, you have spoken about the loss of your mother and the way that this artwork was a dedication to her. What aspects of your artistic practice help you to process grief?
I would say that there is something deeply meditative about sewing, I will say. And I think a lot of artists that sew will say that. People that do carving or things that have a sort of repetitive or building nature can be deeply soothing. I think there was something about the way in which the sewing layered over this soft, diffuse light, and the way that the light emerged told me that she, you know, was emerging in the work in ways that I really hadn't anticipated until I started finishing these pieces and feeling a presence in the room as if I wasn't alone. Not to tell a ghost story, but it did have that kind of feeling, like I wasn't in the room alone.
What role does scale play in your work? Does working at a larger, more installation scale allow you to express yourself in your work?
I would say the answer is yes. So this is Guardian of the Spirits, which is about 17 feet high and about 15 feet wide, and this was suspended on rods that the students attached. These were modular, and I believe there were a total of 8 rods that were, it was a suspension system that was designed by Local Language out of Oakland. And the students attached the artwork to the rods using long threads of monofilament wire for me. And I think for me, it was very exciting to suspend the work in this large space because I always see these installations as a metaphor for the body. It is about how my body moves in space, and it's also a metaphor for landscape because I knew that there were beautiful trees on campus. So this work is the sort of vine-like darker sections are communicating with the trees outside. There's a lot of aspect of bringing the outside in my work. This is a series, these are 3 framed works that the student team, I will comment, hung absolutely perfectly. And these are a series called Icarus. They are 19 by 24 each, and they're graphite, gouache, and candle smoke on paper, and layered with collaged colored pencil and drafting film. So a lot of these works were about, these were created in 2021, and these are about the desire to move closer to the sun, to reach one's desire or focus. And I'm going to stop share for a minute because I'm going to share a video of this space so people can see like a real-time walkthrough. And this is a short video. It's only about a minute, but I think folks will enjoy it, and it will give you a sense of the space. Can folks see video?
Looks good.
Okay. So this is just a view of the space that gives you just a little bit of a sense of the 3-dimensional elements of the work. I think for me, the layers of fabric were very much about trying to talk about the impermeable barrier, that life and death are not so much of a difference, that there is a layer that we think that is separate from us, but it's all a part of us. I think a lot about, connecting with people that I love that have died. And I think in some ways these works are very much about that, about making that connection. And as you move through the space, it kind of brings you out into the sort of light area, which is how the Guardian suspended piece is. And this kind of gives you a sense of how it is suspending from the ceiling. The piece looks differently depending on what time of day and how much light is falling upon it. It can sometimes have an impression of metal or fabric. And so, so this is the Kerfman Gallery, and it's really very exciting to just let people know that the show is up through May 26th. So I hope that people will be able to make it to Fort Collins to check it out. The next piece that I wanted to talk about is Body of Light, which is a public project that was presented by SLATE Contemporary Gallery in collaboration with me at San Francisco Art Market this past April. And I think there's a question from Claudia on this one.
Yes. What is or has been the most challenging obstacle you've faced in creating your artwork? How did you solve it?
So Body of Light was really a challenge on a lot of levels because this was a historic space at Fort Mason Festival Pavilion, and we couldn't drill or otherwise change the space or tape anything on it. So it did require using these types of suspension wires, which was something very new to me in the sense that we had 16 feet ceilings. We could only clamp onto the surfaces of the rebar. And I worked with installers. I worked with, I got expert advice from SLATE. I worked with a fabricator, and I also worked a lot with the site to try to understand what was permitted in this space. So I think in general, when you are faced with obstacles, getting new information, getting technical skills, if you don't have them, asking and trying to find out what you need to know, and not being afraid to ask or not know what you're doing. That's an okay place to be as an artist. And this is a back view. This is the sunlight on the piece here. And it gives you a sense of the silk and the detail. And these are two sections of the piece that give you a sense of how the light sort of moved through it. This piece changed over time, which was what was really kind of cool about it, because this is kind of like a dusk kind of view on the piece with the LED light. And this was sort of a relative of what was shown in the Kerfman show, because the LED light is present as a type of metaphorical body. But this was, you could walk around the piece.
What is the most exciting new artwork that you have seen?
I would say that it's not so much about the most exciting single piece of artwork, but I would say the development of diverse artists becoming more centered in the discussion of contemporary art. I would say, it's incredibly exciting to see more artists of color, more non-binary artists, more artists with disabilities that are being centered in contemporary art, and that these contributions are being valued, because I think it brings a truer reflection of, artistic culture. So I'm, of course, I follow the work of Mark Bradford or Simone Leigh. These are artists that, are deeply inspiring to me.
What do you think is an exciting development in the field that you have participated in?
I would say that as fiber art has transitioned out of sort of being a separateness, I think a lot of people identify me as a fiber artist, and I'm really fine with that. But I think that fiber art is, I'm not so much into distinctions, like one is a fiber artist or one is a filmmaker or one is a painter. I think that art is a fluid action, and that our methods or our mediums change based on the kind of need or desire that we have in making the work. And that's generally how I see it. And I think the next piece is a 2-minute video of Body of Light, so you can get, and I'm just going to run it from the slide so we won't have technical problems. And this was shot by my husband, Al Wong, who has always been with me as I do these big installs. And I love the way that you can sort of see the ocean and figures that are sort of coming through this piece. Again, it's a metaphor about bringing the outside in. I use a lot of different rich colors and jewel-like colors because it's important for me to sort of bring in elements of the environment, but also these colors are symbolic to me. They're passionate, they're metaphysical to me. And the LED again is very much about the spirit moving through something. The San Francisco Bay is a very spiritual place to me. And I love the way that the water kind of interfaces with the work. You know, to be able to see through something. I think again about like the idea that our impression of things or our sense of reality is just a thin, pale layer. It's not concrete, and my perception of things is this sort of permeable barrier, which is why I use all of this netting and thin layers of silk. So let's see.
That was a great video of that piece. Do you have any projects in the works or ideas for future installations? And if so, what are they?
Yeah, so I have a number of shows that are coming up. I have work with my husband as part of a collaborative installation at St. Kate Arts Hotel, which is opening on May 5th. I will be in a group show at Bridget Mayer Gallery opening in early June, as well as a group show at AIR Gallery in Brooklyn in late June. I'm very excited about being in a two-person show in Maui in September at the Maui Cultural Center. I'll be doing large fiber installations with projection. And then finally, I'll be in a group show in LEO Fine Art in Houston in December. So I've got a lot of things going on, and very excited about that. So I'll stop share. And I have my website is hollywongart.com. But folks can always find me through Slate Contemporary Gallery. And I'll stop share so we can open up the conversation for discussion.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Holly, Claudia, and Miles, for that wonderful presentation. It was mesmerizing, and I feel like I really get a sense of the space and the gallery there, which is great. Holly, I'm going to give you a little bit of a break. And this first question I love is for Claudia and Miles. Diane asks, after this wonderful experience with Holly, where will your art go from here?
Sure.
Either of you can start.
That's a great question. I think that during Holly's visit, she kind of reminded us or made us aware of how important discipline is. She was telling us about her day job and how she gets up at like 2 a.m. to work on her art before she goes to work. So I think that was like a really important piece of information. And also just, she's such a good businesswoman, and she's really, really great about making connections with people. So I think that she definitely made an impact on all of us.
And yeah, I couldn't agree more about that. To be a student studying in fine art, and to be able to work so closely with someone who treats this with such profession and discipline, I think made us all kind of take a look at our own practice and realize that there's always areas for improvement, and also going to be times where you just have to, you know, work, and whether that's making you money or not in the arts, it's about being passionate and doing what you feel like. And personally, I'd also like to say that as a drawing major, I'm always trying to expand my horizons, which can be difficult. And so working with Holly, who does such different work from me, really let me see a different view of how art can be done, especially with the way she suspends things and uses LEDs. It was just so informative for me as a person who likes to seek different compositions in that way. So absolutely a learning experience all around.
I'm going to flip that question around and ask you, Holly, what you learned from these students during this process.
I think that it reinforced for me the importance of collaboration. And I think it taught me, it just reinforced what I really believe is a core value, that, you know, you are only as good as what you share and what you put out there. You only get to keep what you give away. And I really believe that. I think that the show was so much better because I was willing to be open to other ideas and other approaches. And Doug was such a great problem solver, for example, in helping me to get that very large piece up all the way up to the ceiling, which the ceiling is like 25 feet, and watching him go up the hydraulic lift, and then him teaching me how to use a hydraulic lift, which was really helpful later on for other installs that I've done. The learning is just so circular and just so rich.
Speaking of your big installations, we have a specific question about she. And they're interested in what she is made out of, because she looks at the same time both delicate and light, but also very kind of sturdy and tactile.
So she is made of Duraline, which is a type of Seth Cole drawing product. It is a drafting film, and it is archival. It has a slightly textured surface, so it takes graphite beautifully. And it, of course, was what I made Phoenix out of. And it also works beautifully with colored pencil. Colored pencil has a waxy quality, kind of, it almost looks like encaustic when you put it on the Duraline. And when you coat it on both sides, it has a stained glass quality in front of light. So that is what it's made of.
I'm going to combine two questions here, which have to do with the scale of your work. And the first part is, what draws you into working so big? And then what are some of the challenges logistically and also in finding space for your pieces?
I think even as a teenager, I was really into, I painted murals as a teenager, and I think some of it, to be honest with you, I think my high school art teacher, Ed Love, was one of the first people that introduced me to working large, because he had introduced me to the Mexican muralists, and that was a huge influence on me, looking at the murals of Orozco and Siqueiros. And I remembered thinking, wow, you could have this big vision. Now, finding big walls wasn't so easy. And what I loved about fiber art was that it was collapsible, and you could roll it and put it in bags and store it in your attic or your garage, which is what I do. I store it in the rafters. There are technical challenges about storage with this type of work. But because it's collapsible, it does give me that flexibility.
Mm-hmm. Miles and Claudia, I'm curious if these works are some of the biggest that you've worked on or installed, and if that has kind of shifted your perspective in your own practice.
Definitely the biggest I've seen. I mean, there are a couple pieces that we've installed over the last over a year that I've worked here, but I would say that these are relatively unmatched, especially the one that is strung up in the back there, and not she, but the one that mimics the tree. I forget the title. And Guardians of the Spirits, yes. And besides the size, also the way that they're hung is completely unique to what we're used to, I'd say, with the monofilament and such.
Yeah, Miles has worked here longer than I have, but it's certainly the biggest installation that I've ever done here or anywhere for that matter. And I always say that it's so fun working here because every single installation, every single exhibition that we put up is different. So this one was certainly a really fun challenge for us.
So the next question is also material based. Holly, you work with a lot of transparent material. And let's see, who is it? Heidi is wondering, have you always worked with transparency? If not, when, why did you start?
I have to admit, I started working with transparency probably about 6 or 7 years ago, and I think it started from collecting plastic bags, really. We had a lot of plastic bags around the house, and I would hold them up to the light, and I would really like them. But I wanted to, over time, I started working with vegetable bags, the netting that you find around oranges. And I started to try to work with materials that were a little bit more durable, because plastic does kind of, depending on the kind of plastic it is, it can decay. So I started working more with silk and some of these, frankly, luxurious materials, because I really loved just the feel of them. And I think I just saw it as the fluidity of the spirit. The more fluid it was, the more I could see through it. I thought more of it as in spiritual terms.
It's interesting because I've known your work for a number of years now, and I've kind of seen the transition from paper and drawing to painting to working with fabric. And you work with all these different materials, but there's always kind of a through line. And I guess my question is, when you start with a new material, how do you approach it? Do you kind of sit with it for a while? Do you dive in and start experimenting? What's kind of that process?
I think it's definitely true that I lay it on the, I'll have a new material and I won't really know, right? I won't know what I'll let it talk to me. I kind of lay it on the table and I look at it and I'm just like, ooh, like, what is it saying to me? Sometimes it's not always clear to me what it wants or what it needs. And sometimes it has to sit there for a while because I just don't know, I'm just not clear. And, but it will reveal itself. And then I just kind of start working with it, using it, cutting it, shaping it, sewing with it, and start building with it in a very intuitive way. And then I step back and say, okay, what is it telling me? And then I do some drawings from that, and it's a sort of iterative loop back process.
Could you talk about thematic development in your thinking and art over the years? So this is a comment from Ron, who's known you for a while.
Yes.
The earliest work I know back in Rutland, Vermont, had to do with geography and the psyche. I sense that you've moved elsewhere.
Yeah, Ron actually, Ron visited the first installation that I ever did of fiber when I did a small residency in Rutland, Vermont. I was stretching vegetable netting. It was great because it was a bronze foundry, and I was like, I'm gonna do some installation of netting, So it's like all these guys pouring bronze, and then there was me with this. So it was kind of great. But yeah, I started moving more towards metaphor, I think, in my work. So I started talking about goddesses and I know that when I first met you, Carolyn, I was, a lot of my pieces had names of goddesses
Mhm.
in them. And now I think my work is sort of diversifying to sort of broader sort of spiritual elements, about presence, guardians or bodies of light in a sort of broader sense. I think I'm moving towards sort of universal themes in my work, because my earlier work was definitely deeply patterned, very nested almost. And I think I was definitely working through something. And I think when I first met you, the work was very, very embedded, almost like little nests or something.
They're very contained and swirling and yeah.
Yes, very much so.
But a burning question about your smaller artworks in the show. So I believe they're the framed pieces. Nora wants to know what they're made of. And I'm also curious if you work big and small at the same time, or if you go between one or the other.
I do go back and forth between big and small. I typically have big things and small things happening at the same time because there's a different type of energy or focus in working in that way. With the Icarus series, that was when I would start with a drawing on paper. Those were done on Bristol. So the paper was super smooth. And I would use gouache, and then I would burn it with candle smoke because there was this sort of cathartic feeling I would have of like spending all this time painting a drawing and then burning it. And it was just like, yeah, like I would take the candle, light it, and then take the paper and hold it above it and just kind of torch it, not blow torch, but just with a candle. And it would give it this nice, almost charcoal-like effect. And then I would erase through it. So it was this addition reduction. And then I would layer sort of collaged, hand-cut things out of drafting film. So they were very much like these complicated little nests.
Mm-hmm. Let's see, let's do 2 more questions. I know we're coming up on the hour. This is a great one from Mark Leary. Hi, Holly. Can you tell us about the transition to more rectilinear patterning in your work that we see in quilt suspension and body of light from earlier, more curvilinear patterns?
So Dr. Leary is simply one of my favorite people. He's wonderful. He's somebody I've worked with for many years in the Department of Psychiatry at UCSF, and someone I deeply admire who has always supported my work. And he rightly observes that she is much more organic in shape, and was made in 2020. And then of course, quilt suspension, those quilted pieces, they are actually rather, they're almost architectural in some ways. And I think I'm really interested in the idea of structure, and then the organic part is the LED that is sort of moving through it. So I'm still using the organic, but I really like the organic sort of with the combined with structure. Combining that together. And I think that there's a stasis and a solidity that I think as a person, that is reflected in the squares and the rectangles and the triangles, but still the fluidness in it. So I think Dr. Leary, I think I'm becoming, stronger and clearer. I think there isn't so much swirling in the work.
It also brings to mind that idea of strong yet delicate at the same time. And you're right, the quilts have these kind of square patterns and shapes, but there's wind that can blow them back and forth.
Yes,
as we noticed at the Fort Mason installation.
right.
So my very last question is for the 3 of you. And I'm curious, what sort of unexpected lessons you learned from each other. So Claudia and Miles, what you learned from Holly. And of course, we know the best teachers make great students. So Holly, what did you learn from Claudia and Miles in this process?
So Claudia goes first, or?
Sure, yeah, sorry.
Sorry about that. I would say that the collaboration process was a really great experience for me. I've never really done any sort of collaboration, and the fact that Holly was so, trusting in us, it was really, really great.
For me, I would say I learned a lot that I didn't expect from this experience about creating a show, a cohesive show where, whether it's 3 pieces or 10 pieces, in this case closer to 10, uh, that it can create like a full conversation that, is all embodied in each work rather than just a few.
And I would say that for me, what I learned from Miles and Claudia and the students was that everybody has a gift. Everybody has something to bring. And when you work with people, when you work with fellow artists, you're only as good as your ability to bring out the best in others. That's really, as an artist, when you're working in a community, you're only that good if you create that ability for others to be at their best. And I think that's true of working in artist communities, being a manager of people, working among your colleagues. It's really about understanding that you're one of a team, and it is that ecosystem that is at what builds artist culture and is what helps artists sustain their careers. As we loop back to that question of having a sustainable art career, it is that support structure, that constant loop back of support, that sort of radical care for each other.
I love that expression, radical care. I think this is a wonderful way to end the talk. Thank you, Holly. Thank you, Claudia and Miles, so much for joining us today. And thanks to everyone who is watching.
Thank you, everybody.
Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.